Well, we're joined now by the Culture, Media and Sport Secretary, Maria Miller. Secretary of State, Mr Cameron set his own test, the Dowler test. And in the words of the Dowler family lawyer, he's failed his own test.
Look, let's be absolutely clear. The government today has accepted in full the Leveson principles, and what we're doing is now we're moving forward to see how we take those principles and put them into practice.
In full, excluding the law, which is the absolute cardinal element of this report.
In full, so that we have the sort of independent regulation that will mean that the victims who have been so affected by events of recent years can be assured that these sorts of things wouldn't happen again. So the sort of independent code, the sort of ability to be able to fine organisations that do the wrong thing, and also to make sure that people make amends as well.
But you're leaving out what Lord Leveson said. He said there needs to be a law to validate this.
When we look at the practical way we start to implement the recommendations, that's where we feel there are some questions to be asked. It's not just around the way a statutory regulation might work, but actually there's some really serious questions to be asked around things like data protection, how that might work, indeed how the role of Ofcom might work as well.
But you keep saying that you've embraced the whole of Leveson, but Leveson said it was essential that there should be a law. After all, you've trusted the press before. 8 times there have been investigations into the press by royal commissions and the rest. And now you're leaving it up to the press again to sort this out with no legal underpinning of any description.
Well, yes, we have grave concerns about whether legal underpinning is absolutely necessary for what Lord Leveson is talking about here. But let's also be clear, it's Lord Leveson who is now saying the ball is very much in the court of the press. They need to come forward with recommendations for an independent self-regulatory body that actually addresses the principles that he set out. But yes, we have grave concerns, and that's why tonight we've started cross-party talks to talk about those practical implementation issues. And I'm glad to say those talks went well. We'll be having further talks early next week to make sure that we go down into this detail.
Do you believe the judge when he says, and he went out of his way to say this would not be statutory regulation?
I think that he is drawing a really important definition between what might be wholesale statutory regulation of the press and statutory underpinning. I think the concern...
So all this crossing of the Rubicon, which the Prime Minister talks about, is sort of alarmist talk, isn't it?
The concern that we have is once you start to put in place that statutory underpinning, that you can very quickly get into a piece of legislation which could do so much more. And that's why, as part of our cross-party talks, we've already said that we will be putting forward a draft bill for consideration so that the other parties can see the sort of problems we're concerned about. But let's not get away from it here. The government and David Cameron set out very clearly that we are accepting in full the principles set out by Leveson. And yes, we do have concerns here, but we believe those concerns can be addressed.
Are you not forgetting the victims? I mean, after all, the judge said these people were the victims of outrageous, reckless misbehaviour. And they have embraced everything Leveson said. This report was all about them. The Prime Minister said it was all about them. They want the law. As one voice, they want the law. And you're rejecting them.
And as I said up front, we're absolutely accepting in full the principles set out in Leveson for exactly that reason, because we know that the status quo is not an option. And we will be working with the opposition parties on making sure that we get that detail right as we move forward. People wouldn't expect to have a knee-jerk reaction from a government today. They'd expect us to work through the detail.
Well, there was only a knee-jerk reaction. There was an immediate no from the Prime Minister, effectively, to law.
No, what we said was we need to work through the detail to make sure that this would work in practice, and I think that's what people would expect us to do.
Secretary of State, thank you very much.